Help. Great to be with everybody today, and especially great to be with you, Libba. I'll just say a couple of words by way of introduction, but this is our first seminar for 2025. Now, Libba, some of you obviously know Libba quite well, maybe through various networks, but some of you may not know Libba, a psychotherapist in private practice in Sydney, as well as being a long-term mindfulness teacher and director at Openground, which was founded in 2004, is now an Australian-wide charity for mental health. Libba's been teaching MBSR, or mindfulness-based stress reduction, since 2007 through Openground, and was the co-founding director of Openground for Organisations, which has been running mindfulness programs in corporate, health, education, government sectors for over a decade. Prior to that, Libba worked as a litigation lawyer for 14 years. So I'd like to hear a bit more about that and how it was that you jumped from the legal ship to the mindfulness ship, and was that a perilous jump or not? So we'll find out perhaps in a moment. And that includes at a partnership level, and that was obviously a driver for the work you're doing now. And Libba helps people with a range of physical and mental health challenges, including stress and isolation, burnout, anxiety, depression, trauma, pain, coping with illness, and existential concerns. And so today we're going to be exploring a few things, the mindful way to insight and coping with adversity. So welcome, Libba. It's great to be with you.
Oh, it's great to be with you too, Craig. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, Libba, perhaps first find out, I'm always interested to hear about people's own journeys, and always they're personal, but there are sometimes common themes as well. But you're in law, working for a number of years. What was it that led to your journey, leaving law and then moving into mindfulness? Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, it's not a natural segue, is it, that you'd pick? No, I suppose I was a very reluctant lawyer initially. I didn't know when I finished school what I was going to do, and I got the marks, and everyone said you should do law. And so I fell into law, so to speak. And as I started practicing law, because I've always been fascinated by the mind and what makes people tick and just the human spirit, really. So I started studying psychotherapy on the side, not thinking it would ever take me anywhere, but just to kind of satisfy that little yearning in me. And then, as you can imagine, being in litigation, law took over. And I realised pretty early on, and I then had young children as well, that if I didn't learn how to manage my mind, I was going to drop all these balls I had in the air. So it was one thing knowing about the law and your technical knowledge, but it was really how am I going to manage myself so I can manage everything and everyone in much more effective ways. And I had practiced meditation since my early 20s. So I'd had some stints of quite long practice, and then it kind of fell away with the law. And it was actually it was after the birth of my second child, not long after, and I was so depleted. And I came back to practice, and then one morning I just woke up with this, it wasn't very dramatic or anything, but it was just this deep knowing that for the rest of my life, I'm one of these people that's going to need to practice every day. So I just knew that it just was a knowing that came, and I was like, so that was just committed to practice. And but I never intended to be a mindfulness teacher. That was not on the cards at all. And I was getting more and more interested in the psychotherapy thing and jumping ship from law to psychotherapy, but not teaching mindfulness. And then I had met Timothea Goddard, the co-founding director of the Openground, and through my psychotherapy training. And I hadn't seen her for many years, so it was quite coincidental actually, but I'd helped her with a proposal for a law firm. And then later on down the track, when we ran into each other, she told me she was doing the first teacher training of MBSR teacher training in Australia, and invited me to come along for free because, as a bit of a thank you. So because I was kind of committed to practice, I thought, great, I'll come and deepen my practice, and that's great, and what have I got to lose? And anyway, one thing led to another, but I somehow found myself teaching for Openground, which was wonderful. Like, it's been absolutely wonderful, but it certainly wasn't my intention at all. It was just a synchronicity of events, I think. Yeah.
I'm just interested in that moment of crystallization of
Mm,
the knowing that you needed to bring this into your life, not a
yes.
practice occasionally here or there, but you
Yep.
said you need to practice every day.
Every day.
What,
Yeah.
what, look, I'm sure a lot of the people on this webinar today would sort of say, look, I can relate to that. I kind of have an
Mm,
intention, practice for a while, stop practicing.
mm.
And what is it that really crystallized that knowing for you that you weren't in two minds any longer?
No. Yeah, there was no question. And it's really difficult, Craig. I actually don't know because it literally was a waking up and a knowing. It just came. And I'm not one of those people, I was kind of a cynical lawyer. I don't believe in hippy trippy experiences. And it wasn't, as I said, very dramatic or cathartic. It just was, oh yeah, right, this is what I've got to do for the rest of my life. I'm just that sort of person. I need to do it. I'm a very enthusiastic person. I've got high energy. I'm interested in lots of things. I don't know if all of that fed into me knowing on some deeper level I needed to stay more grounded or whatever, but it just arose. It really did. And I'd already got a lot from practice, but it wasn't a conceptual thing or a conscious intention. So I know that's probably not a very satisfactory answer, but that's actually what happened.
Well, I think the only satisfactory answer to anything in life is the authentic answer because,
Yes.
not trying to embellish it or change, but just an interesting thing how sometimes for many of us, there could be this back and forward for a while
Yes.
until there's just this,
Yep.
all of a sudden, surprisingly relatively easy to maintain the practice because it's
Yep.
being in those two minds that really makes it most difficult, I think.
I think that's right. And, maybe if I hadn't become a teacher, maybe it would have dropped off, but I don't think so. There was just such
Mm.
I don't even know if resolve is the right word. I think it's just this deeper knowing. It's like, oh, this is what I have to do. Okay. It was
Yeah.
just yeah. Mm.
In what ways did you find that the mindfulness helped you with the adversity of coping with law, young
Yeah.
family, all the
Yeah.
balls you had in the air? Like, what
Yes.
were the things that really stood out for you?
Yeah. I think initially, and I think this is very true for a lot of people that come to practice, it is the stress or the distress in their lives or wanting to see a change, knowing they're not coping, doing what they're doing. And certainly for me, I just knew how upregulated I was becoming, and then that was affecting my ability, not only to do my work, but more also I was engaging with the kids. Like they're young and it's such a precious time, and really wanting to enjoy and savor that and not be dominated by my to-do list. And so I could really see that this practice really offered me something much more than but just stress management, but also that I was actually going to be able to live life in a much more satisfying, engaging way. Do you know what I mean? With my interactions with others. Yeah.
It's not an uncommon thing that when people start practicing mindfulness, they realize you can be physically present at home, but mentally
Yes.
still at work. And I'm sure
Yes.
if we have any kind of work that really does move us emotionally, then chances are when we're physically home, we could still be mentally at work or going on to the next day
Absolutely.
at work. So that sort of sense of really being present, paying
Yep.
attention, engaging with your kids at the time and so on. That's one of the things that people will often notice that
Yeah.
changes for them.
And there's all those delicious little moments with little people, that you just lose if you're trapped, all caught up with work or whatever, and it just goes and they're gone soon. So,
Yeah,
it's just, yeah, yeah,
just kind of miss it. And
yeah.
now in your you became a teacher.
Hmm.
Was there a moment when, like, how do you know if you're ever ready to be a teacher? Was there kind of like, because many people feel a sense of trepidation about stepping into that sort of role, and was it
Yeah.
something you couldn't help yourself from doing, or was it something that you kind of reached the point that you knew? How did it unfold for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you ever know if you're ever ready. It's a bit like parenting. Are you ever ready to have a child?
You find yourself in it and all of a sudden just rolling right
Exactly.
through.
Exactly. So again, I don't think I actually made a conscious decision, so to speak. And actually, it was Tim who approached me and said, well, would you like to teach for Open Ground? But there was what I did realize through the teacher training, which was brilliant, was just what this could offer other people. And initially, I was really thinking about lawyers because I'd seen, and I know, lawyers get a bad rap, but there's so many good people that kind of go down the gurgler, or there's substance abuse, or, yeah, just because of all sorts of conditions. So I really initially was like, God, I'd love to give this to my profession in some way, somehow get it in there. But it was actually Tim who said, would you like to teach for Open Ground? I had to teach some private rounds first. And yeah, I was like, oh, sure. Yeah, because I love the kind of group stuff too. And I love being in groups and just fellow humans with one another. And it's not our social identities and who we are in the world. Like in that room, we're just here as a group of human beings, otherwise not known. So it's lovely work. But whether I knew I was ready or not, I'm not sure that.
Most of us don't know that we were ready for anything really, but life
No,
just happens to
no.
us as we go along. You
Yeah.
practiced in the early days, and quite possibly still do now, insight meditation.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Is that just basic mindfulness practice, but you highlight moments of insight, or is it something, a variation on the theme? Can you tell us what's insight meditation? Because I'm sure all of us would love a little bit more insight from time to time.
Well, I think there's many ways to kind of answer that question. And I suppose, and this is not intended to be the exhaustive, holistic one, but I suppose very simply put, it is a training of the mind that actually helps you over time get insights. And I think initially you're getting insights into your own patterns of emotional reactivity, patterns of thinking. So essentially, it does involve mindfulness practice where you train the mind, and, it might be to focus on a particular object of attention, or at some stages no object and rest in open awareness. But over time, through that training of attention, at some point your mind's going to wander. And often where our mind wanders is to our habits of mind. So it's really interesting because you start to see the nature of your own mind and the patterns of thinking, patterns of emotional reactivity. So I think this is where you start to develop a lot more self-awareness. And so there's more insight into your own patterns. So I think initially there's insights in that sense individually. But as you practice and as practice kind of deepens and matures, I think what's even more, I suppose, transformative or powerful is seeing insights into the nature of the human condition itself and the nature of experience itself, that it moves from the kind of the particular to the more universal, as one of my teachers says, and that this is what it's like to be a human being. This is incredibly powerful because then you can take things a lot less personally and you don't have to get so caught up. So it's quite liberating.
Yes, and I take it that's not a play on word of your own name, liberating. But anyway,
No, it's not.
I'm sorry. I apologise to all our viewers today. It's a dad joke. I really didn't mean it. I can't help myself from punning from time to time. But I was going to share, a couple of perhaps examples, one personal, one from somebody doing a mindfulness course I was running. I'll share that one first. High-performing professional woman, had anxiety for quite a long, stress, for years and so on. Interested to do a mindfulness course to see if it would help. And week by week, doing the formal practice and practicing being mindful and present and curious and noticing in day-to-day life. And anxiety and stress abated to some extent, but it was still sort of there in the background. But I think it might have been 5 weeks into the program, and you're having a review of how are you going, what are you noticing during the week. And she spoke up and she had a very interesting experience. My boss said to me, I'd like to see you, could you come to my office at 2 this afternoon? And she just noticed this all of a sudden flood of stress.
Mm-hmm.
But she noticed it in a kind of oh, that's interesting. Like just like in a curious sort of way.
Yes,
Not
yes.
judging, not reacting, but just, oh, it's interesting. And and she said, I saw a thought that I had never seen before. And I said, if you could put that thought into words, what was the thought? She said, the thought was, I'm not good enough.
Oh, brilliant.
And she said, I'd never noticed that before.
Mm.
As soon as she noticed that, it was like the anxiety, and she noticed all this stuff from the past and all this kind of was sort of associated with it, but it was almost like a magic trick, and you see how it's done. All of a sudden, the trick is sort of
Yes,
you solve it, and that was a major turning point for her.
yes,
Is this the kind of thing you mean, like when insight can come, we kind of see something that's sort of in plain
yes.
sight, but we just can't see?
That's a brilliant articulation, actually, of what happens and what can happen. Because I think that's right, that say we come because of our stress, emotional reactivity, all of that sort of stuff. And as we practice, that does tend to settle a bit more. And as we get a bit more mastery over where we place our attention from moment to moment, rather than being hijacked by patterns of mind, but also get a bit more steadiness of mind and stability, it's exactly that, Craig, as you said, we start to see things we hadn't noticed before. And there's spaces open up where we can make little connections or linkages. And then as soon as we see those things, once we become aware of them, we have a choice, don't we? Do we grab hold of that, stick to it, or can we just let it go? Like it sounded like for this woman, it kind of lost its charge or its hold on her. And so, there is this saying that there's what arises, which is often outside our control, but how we choose to meet what arises, this is something we have choice over. And that seeing is what you're talking about. We start to see things we hadn't noticed before. And, as the mind quietens, we can start to see more and more and more. So I think that's a beautiful articulation of how it unfolds. Yeah.
And it seemed an important part of it was just the watching, just the observing, just
Yes.
kind of a curiosity, just
Yes.
looking, rather than, a mental analysis. What's wrong with me? Why do I do this?
Yes.
It actually seemed quite free of that.
Yes.
And it seems that may be an important part of the insight as well, is just dropping all the overthinking, the mental analysis, which often just puts layer upon layer into the...
Absolutely. Yeah. Because again, you point out two really important things. One is what we pay attention to, but the qualities, like the presence, the curiosity, the open-mindedness, as opposed to the judgment, the evaluating. And, as we both probably know through our own practice and through teaching, it's really difficult, actually, because in this society we're so conditioned, or thinking is so privileged, I think. And so it's very easy to get attached to our thinking. So there's what happens, and then all of a sudden there's the thought that carries us away, and we go off with a commentary about what's happened. And, with insight practice, we're really paying attention with this curiosity, in time, more open-heartedness as well as open-mindedness and a sense of compassion. But this curiosity to this direct experience, our direct moment-to-moment unfolding experience, as opposed to the thoughts, the concepts. So we're getting underneath the thoughts and the concepts. So I think that's what kind of really opens things up in a different way too, definitely.
Yeah. To quote Shakespeare, Hamlet, thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought. Seems perhaps in some, I'm sorry, another apology for quoting Shakespeare, but...
No, I'm impressed. I don't have any Shakespeare quotes, except to be or not to be, that's it.
If I turn off my my background, you'll see Shakespearean quotes behind me on the wall, but I'll spare everybody that. But it seems like that thing. So when you're practicing insight meditation, can you say a little bit more, if you're happy to, about so what's actually being practiced at that time?
Yeah. Look, there's many ways and many different traditions do it differently too, but I suppose kind of the most simple explanation is we're learning how to really be present to our moment-to-moment experience with as much curiosity as possible, as little judgment, evaluating, noticing if and when that happens, coming back, but really trying to be present to things as they are, so without needing them to be different as well. And because a lot of our stress and distress and angst comes from wanting things to be different than how they are. And the more we can just be with what is, however it is appearing, disappearing, we start to really, there's so many things that happen, but one of the things is we start to realize that there can be quite an ease and spaciousness and even a subtle pleasure in just being present with things as they are without needing them to be different. So there's a whole layer of reactivity that can fall away with that. But as I said before, we also start to see the movements of mind as well. And the movements are important. Like we notice where our mind goes. So it's not like, oh, that shouldn't be happening. It's like, oh, be curious about that. The to-do list. Worry about work. So that also gives you information and insight into what you're preoccupied with. So it's, there's many, many things, but just initially, it's really this training just to be really aware of what is happening as it's happening, moment to moment to moment. Yeah.
It seems like that kind of issue is one of the main challenges for anybody practicing meditation, and trying to live more mindfully in day-to-day life.
Yes.
Is the noticing what's happening, but with the judgment.
Yes.
I'm trying to relax, or I'm trying to clear my mind, or
yes.
I shouldn't be stressed. I should be present, and because observing all this other stuff happening, which is just like nature playing out.
Yep.
But with the judgment, with the criticism, which brings in the attitude that whatever's happening is wrong.
Yes.
And I've got to try and stop that and experience something different. And it seems like with insight, it's just like, drop all that. Just watch. Just watch.
Just watch and just rest with the flow of the experience. You can rest with the flow of this breath. And often, say something like that, a breath practice. And so people are invited to just feel the sensations of the breath, no matter how they're breathing. Everyone knows how to breathe, otherwise they wouldn't be here. And yet suddenly thoughts come up, am I breathing right? Should I be breathing more deeply? Blah, blah, blah. If I hadn't asked them to focus on the breath, there'd be no thoughts about breathing. The body knows how to breathe. So there's also, which again is kind of contrary for us in this culture, there's a just sort of surrendering and trusting in the being with, rather than having to be in control, direct, get out of your own way really, and just rest in the flow of this breath that is breathing itself of its own accord without you having to be involved.
I suppose one of the most surprising insights is that the very things we're striving to experience or to get, when we stop trying to get them, it's like,
they're already here.
There they were.
They're already here. Yeah.
Like I suppose the metaphor of the glasses on our forehead, and we're looking everywhere for our glasses, and already got them. But so I'm curious as to what sort of insights can be learned about coping or dealing with adversity, and all sorts of different adversities, and from the small scale, thousands of little ones in day-to-day life, to large scale. So what are some of the insights that can be learned about how we deal with adversity? What can we learn about dealing with adversity in a more mindful and meaningful way? Yeah.
This doesn't completely answer your question, but just to wave the flag for adversity a little. Number one, it's just a factor of life. It's inherent in our life. But also, there's such an avoidance of it, and a feeling that we shouldn't be having it. We don't like it. We don't want it, the avoidance of it. And I think adversity really opens us up to doing things differently in a good way, because what we've been doing so far, isn't working anymore. So it's unpleasant, it's difficult, it's terrible, there's suffering, but it can open us up to doing things differently in a way that's much more freeing, really, and eases a lot of stress and distress. But more specifically to your question, there's adversity on so many levels, isn't there? So, and also depending on the cohort. So people, for instance, with pain, it could start, obviously you start and you meet people where they're at. And so pain, the physical sensations are in the foreground. For some with anxiety or depression, it could be the thinking patterns or the emotional states, etc. But what we're really learning in our practice is no matter what arises, no matter where the kind of pain, stress, distress is arising, whether it's manifested in sensations, thoughts, emotions, etc., we are learning, rather than having to fight, go into battle, flee, etc., which is so hardwired for us, how do we turn towards these different things, for want of a better word, and learn how to be with them? And, you know, depending on how intense it is, we can really do this gently. So just like sort of dip your toes in and just work the edges, but turning towards and starting to bear it a little more, because previously it was unbearable. And that's when we go off into we get hijacked by our patterns of reactivity and, you know, freak out, panic, get, you know, things flare up. But the more we can learn to turn towards and start to be with unpleasant experience in less reactive ways, the more I think we start to, our window of tolerance gently expands. So we become less reactive and we can bear a wider breadth of experience, I suppose, which is what then makes us, you know, more resilient. We tolerate a lot more than we could with a lot less reactivity and more curiosity. And so I think it's got such a lot to offer. And also it then means it's like there's less fear in the system. People can start to trust in themselves and their own capacity to manage states. And, you know, there can be less no-go zones, I think, if you like. And that's freedom in my, you know, that's a, you know, I think it was Sylvia Borstein who said happiness is an inside job. Well, so is freedom. Freedom is an inside job, I think. Yeah.
I remember a moment of insight, perhaps for myself in my teenage years, that I had a great fear of public speaking, and there was a position looming that might require that, and the temptation was to turn down that invitation and so on, and to avoid. But something in me said, no, avoiding things makes them bigger and makes my trust in my own capacity smaller.
Yes.
And so it's really uncomfortable. Like, and when I talk about fear of public speaking, I like full on, you know,
God,
panic and the whole thing.
Gosh, and look where you are now, Craig. You do so much.
Still working with the fear, and but it kind of what you were saying before about the turning to, the learning to notice with less reactivity, learning to work with.
Yes.
You know, it wasn't about trying to avoid or get rid of it. It was just like learning to be with it in a different way.
Exactly.
Which, as you said, it kind of opens, you know, the challenge diminishes, and we realize, because I think our capacities are greater than we thought they were.
Yes.
But that turning towards, that learning to work with. I mean, mind you, I've never had a particular desire to work with my fear of heights and jump out of a plane at 10,000 feet.
Yet.
But I haven't worked with that one, but maybe I could if I had to. But you know, the things that present themselves to us, as you're saying, that the desire is to turn away.
Exactly.
And it always seems to me that we can't understand something if we turn away from it and don't look at it.
It's so true. Yeah.
To turn the light on, turn towards, be curious and
there's a befriending, actually, because it's also, because the other thing that happens, sometimes people turn away, but sometimes people think they have to go into battle with it and overcome it. And, you know, so there can be that too, which also leads to a lot more internal angst. But I think in a way, there's really this attending and befriending. It's all just part of being human. And I think this is what we get over time. The more we are with ourselves and all the different experiences and states of mind that arise, we start to realise this has actually got nothing to do with me personally. This is what it's like to be a human being in this world at this time, in this point, in this place. There's a whole lot of causes and conditions for whatever I'm feeling, sensing, thinking in this moment. And then, you know, being able to just sort of hold it all a lot more lightly too. You know, you take it a lot less personally. It's just like, oh God, this human condition, it's not easy stuff.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
an
but there's a
interesting experience.
befriending, I think. There's a befriending, you know, becoming curious, but with this sense of friendliness, like, so, oh, tell me more, like, show me more. What is this? Like getting more intimate almost,
Yeah.
and that I think dissolves something. It dissolves reactivity, I think. Yeah.
And even the judging, reacting, criticizing when it arises, as it no doubt habitually does for
Yes.
pretty much all of us most of
Yes.
the time.
Yes.
But if we can just kind of bring that curiosity to that,
Yes.
noticing the effect of that,
Yep.
noticing what it leads to, and it's like, all of that is informative in a way.
Definitely. I know. And we all have blind spots, don't we? Continue like, and all of a sudden, oh, and I've just suddenly realized that. And, you know, and so it goes on. So,
But what if we find, for example, that there are particular patterns of behavior and attitude that are not serving us well? We keep repeating patterns that are really not good for ourselves and perhaps not
yes,
good for others as well. How do
yes.
we work that when we notice it?
Yeah. That's the real challenge, isn't it? Because I think that whole process of change is very incremental. It works in tiny, tiny little increments. But the first step in that process is seeing it. Because I think initially before that, we're just doing it and we're acting out of it without seeing. And then it's almost an uncomfortable stage where we start to realize, oh, I'm doing that thing again. So we see it, but we're still doing it. We still can't kind of dislodge or unhook from it. But it's just a necessary part of the process. And the more and more we can pick it up more early. And I think this is something actually about mindfulness training. People often think about the mind as if it's just the brain, but the mind is embodied. So we're also, as you know, this is really starting to get to know the nature of our minds in terms of our bodies and sensations, and we can pick up cues earlier at a subtler level that might be starting in the body. And as our attention gets deeper and more refined, if you can start to pick up those cues when they're, say, 3 out of 10 as opposed to a 10 out of 10, you've got a lot more bandwidth to be able to interrupt that pattern. But in the beginning, we're just getting it too late, or we can then scold ourselves after the fact. And I think this is what happens to us all. But I think if people just reframe that to think this is just part of the process of change, and the seeing it is freeing and will lead to more freedom from that pattern in time. Yeah.
Well, the awareness always seems to kick in earlier than the shift
Yes.
of attitude,
Yes.
shift of habitual pattern of thinking. And you mentioned a kind of an uncomfortable phase where there's the
Yes.
seeing, but there's still the judging and the criticizing. And
Yes.
that's a bit of a challenging phase
It
in a way.
is. It is. I know, because we're not very patient with ourselves either. Because once we see it, it's like, oh well, I'm still doing that. So in a way, we're still locked into a way of scolding ourselves and still not being curious or accepting or allowing or, you know. But what to do? It's kind of an inevitable phase, I think, because of the way we've been conditioned. Yeah.
So is part of the teaching that you, in a sense, you're modeling the curiosity, you're modeling the non-judging, even
I
if
hope so.
something happened and I got really frustrated with myself. Oh, can you say a little bit about that? Oh, it's just what's wrong with you, etc. So what's
Yes.
the effect of that internal dialogue about, so is it in a way you're modeling in the teaching that curiosity, that gentleness, that non-judgmental attitude?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I hope that's what's happening, that I'm, there's a degree of embodiment of it. But I am genuinely curious too, actually. It's interesting. The teaching is such a kind of parallel process or an extension of practice anyway, because just as you're trying to be curious about yourself in your own practice and be with whatever's arising in this kind of open-hearted, curious way. The same is true when we start a group. It's like, wow, okay, let's see where we go. So I think there's a real parallel there, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Just briefly, and we're going to take some questions just in a couple of minutes. But we're both involved with a parliamentary mindfulness initiative.
Yes. Yes.
So must be coming up in a few months to 2 years, so a bit over 18 months ago. And Catherine Freeman was also involved with that, who's involved with our centre here at Monash. And I kind of think that possibly the toughest, I don't know, law's pretty tricky, medicine's pretty tricky, but I reckon being a mindful parliamentarian must be about the trickiest gig on the planet, because it's such an adversarial, such an intensely vulnerable, critical sort of,
Yes.
area. But after that launch up in Canberra, you were involved with running some mindfulness training for as a follow-on to that for the some of the staff and parliamentarians. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but it strikes me to be a very challenging area to be mindful.
It was, I think, it was fascinating to get a glimpse into their lives. And I have a newfound respect for our politicians and how hard they work, actually. They're on all the time. And I think, as you say, it's the adversarial nature of Parliament means, it's a very stimulating place. So in one sense, it's very easy to be fully engaged and fully present in some parts of it. But what it's not very conducive for is the qualities of curiosity and compassion and open-heartedness, because that adversarial nature, it actually activates the threat system. And so once our threat system is activated, we kind of all go about protecting ourselves and our little patch. And, that adversarial nature, it's a bit like with the law, actually, in litigation. I did see parallels, because unfortunately, what happens is people then really get attached to their viewpoint, their policies, and they are hell-bent on picking holes and flaws in the other. So it's not very constructive, as opposed to being curious. It's like, oh, that's a good point, and how do we take a bit from that and a bit from that? And it doesn't work that way. And as you say, they're kind of watching their back all the time. So it's very difficult to be mindful. And I also think, because of the complexity of their work, the amount of their workload, the time pressures, the nature of it, the kind of irony of it all is it's even more important for them to somehow carve out space, because they are making policies that are affecting us all, our country, our world. So it's an issue, but it's difficult. It's really difficult, I think. It is challenging. Yeah.
So this is, of course, part of the worldwide movement in bringing, or attempting to bring, more mindfulness into Parliament, and I hope to see that work go further. Now, so there will be no doubt some questions that some of our viewers would like to put to Libba. Libba, you up for a couple of questions?
Yeah, go for it. Yep, sure. Do I have to? Will you let me know, Jess, or do I need to?
I can read these out to you.
Yeah.
Carry on the conversation. So I've got one here from Rowan. It's a great question, actually. From a psychotherapy perspective, can you speak to why we can, on one hand, hate feeling anxious, but also sometimes oddly enjoy it? He's likened this to how some people can be addicted to chaos.
Oh, Rowan, I'd love to answer that with a question rather than an answer, as is the psychotherapist's way. Because I am curious about that and what it's like for you, because I suppose everyone experiences these things individually. So I don't think there's a kind of blanket answer. But one thing I would say is that often, is the pleasure or something because it's familiar? It's sort of like, this old jumper and you can put it on and you know how it fits. Is that I'm not sure if that's what he's getting at, and if that sufficiently answers his question, but often it could be because that's a very known way of being and there's something very familiar about it. So on some level, it's comforting. You know yourself in that, if that makes sense.
I sometimes wonder too, perhaps on this question as well, whether sometimes when people are energized, engaged, very responsive, sometimes thinking of it as stress, but they're not actually stressed, they're just fully energized.
Yes.
Which is different to the actual whole stress response being activated and can't function well. And I wonder if there are any sort of, sometimes people are saying, no, I actually love that, but it's not necessarily
That's
stress.
a good point, actually. Yeah, because there is both the threat system that gets activated with anxiety, and so then that's more like you get the stress hormones of adrenaline and cortisol that feels unpleasant. But another upregulation of the nervous system, but more positively flavoured, is the drive system. So when you're powering through, you're interested, you're accomplishment driven, etc., resource seeking, and that's much more pleasurable, and that's more like dopamine gets released. So that kind of feel good neurotransmitter. So it could be that that's at play too. Definitely. Yeah, it's a really good point, Craig. Yeah.
Yes.
I've got one from Kay. Are you able to talk to how mindfulness links to self-compassion?
Yes. So I think, I also said about the opening of the mind, but also this open-heartedness. And I think one of the things that it's almost like compassion is a natural byproduct of the practice, has been my experience. It might be different for others. But the more you sit with yourself and all the different states and find a way to be with it with less, with more curiosity and less reactivity, and the more you realize, this is just part of being human, the more also you're attuned to seeing these states in other people, but with less reactivity. So the more you can bear it in yourself, the more you can bear it in others. But also, because you know what it feels like from the inside out, there is this natural compassion for others. Now, I know the question was about self-compassion, but interestingly, for me, it was for others and then back to me. For others, they start with self-compassion and then go to outward. But for my own experience was the more I could be with myself in those ways, the more I could recognize it in others. And then my heart opened because I knew what that felt like on the inside. And then it kind of fed back to me now that I can be with myself in more compassionate ways. But it's interesting because most people go self-compassion, compassion to others. For me, it was the different way around, actually, which is just the way it was.
So is that a lot about cultivating that befriending,
Yeah.
to the non-reactivity?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that there's, every time there's a moment of stress or distress, even that recognition is like, this is a moment of stress. Oh, ouch, pang, feeling that and that sort of how to be like soothe yourself, like be your own best friend in your moment of distress, as opposed to kicking in with the boot, like, I should have done that. That's why, which only then activates the threat system as opposed to the soothing system. So I suppose kind of a more simpler explanation, actually, as we've kind of gone about this in a circuitous way, is that mindfulness practice does activate the soothing system, which is this much more befriending, compassionate way, of how you would be with your best friend. So I think that's a very natural byproduct of practice.
This one may be a bit more practical. What would you say to someone who feels overwhelmed and struggles to find time to practice mindfulness?
Yes. I think everyone struggles to find time, and this is probably not music to your ears, but having to make time, actually. And if you're really struggling, and start small, carve out a little bit of time and maybe just commit, say, to 5 minutes a day for 1 week and see what it offers you. But it's very easy to be carried away by the overwhelm, but unless that will continue unless you do something differently. So I really get it, and this is, rife in today's society, actually, but it's, yeah. And but the other thing is people are using social media a lot, aren't they? So often I hear people, I don't have time, but then they're on their phones for half an hour or scrolling, or it's like, well, 5 minutes of practice would probably make you feel a lot better than half an hour on Insta. But, each to their own, so be it. It's the way of this world.
I just need another couple of hours of scrolling my phone each day.
That's
I'll be
right.
all right. I just can't.
Yeah.
It like what you're saying before, is a moment of crystallization that you recognize you need it. All of a sudden, when there's that clarity of your mind that it's actually needed,
Yes.
you find the time, you make the time.
Yep. And it's just there's a whole thing that falls away from it. It's just it's like, I just got to do this. Done.
It seems
You know,
like
like people exercise now, whereas decades ago people didn't exercise like they do now. So I do think in time this will be seen as caring for your mind, just as there, you know, people now are really up for exercising and make time for that. So watch this space.
I think we have time for just one more. There's quite a few in there. I will grab Emily's question here. She's asking, how do you think we straddle the line when working with high performers, for example, lawyers? A, by tapping into that high elite mindset, and B, balancing it with our common humanness.
That's a very complex question. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So how do we straddle the line when working with high performers? Tapping into that high elite mindset and also balancing it with our common humanness.
I would say when that high elite mindset could include our humanness and must include our humanness, if it's probably a bit too simple an answer, but I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, actually. Yeah.
And in making that a simple answer, you can have one more from Robin. Is mindfulness training being offered as an elective in pre-service teacher training? Well, this is actually as a means to support teacher well-being and the ripple effect. Mindfulness being walked into the classroom through a teacher's embedded practice, mindfulness being caught by the students.
Oh, is this a question about training teachers to teach mindfulness?
Yes.
Yeah. One thing I would say about that, and you know, including myself, we all do. People come and want to share mindfulness from very well-intentioned ways. If you want to offer mindfulness, I would have a very strong practice. So you're teaching from your lived experience, because I think that really changes how it's received. And kids who've got such a great barometer, I love it. They can tell when they're being taught a technique to get something as opposed to it being imparted in a different way. So I think anyone wanting to offer it, any teacher training you can do would be really good investment and will help you be much more effective in sharing it. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question. I don't know if you've got anything to add with that, Craig, but
Well, I couldn't agree more that you know it really is what we learn to bring back to ourselves, start with ourselves, and then if at some stage with others. But for a teacher, it's what's modelled. We're modelling, and be an example if we can, be a warning if we can't be an example. But this is what will happen to you if you're not mindful. So you better practice mindfulness. So, but yes, it really have to ground in personal practice. I couldn't agree more.
yeah.
I think it's about time for us to finish, Libba. So it's look, I could have gone on all day. I had so many other questions I didn't get to that I'd love to ask, but thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you to everybody who joined the seminar today, and we'll look forward to everybody's company next time on March the 6th. And so we'll be sending out more information about that for those who'd like to join us then. But thank you once again, Libba.
Oh, thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it. So great pleasure. Yeah.
Thank